Okay, revolutionary greetings from the All African People's Revolutionary Party. My name is Sabukwe Shakura. I'm an organizer with the party. I'll be the moderator for our program this afternoon. Yeah, AAPRP would like to welcome you to this webinar entitled Neocolonialism, French Imperialism in Africa Today. Our objective today, ahead of the upcoming French African Summit scheduled for Kenya and the Pan-African Anti-Imperialist Summit in Kenya, May 9th and 10th, we wanted to give a historical analysis of France's past and current imperial legacy in Africa. France, like all Western imperialist countries, established colonial territories in Africa in the late 1800s. After colonial powers warred against themselves in Africa, they agreed to a peace treaty at the Berlin Conference in 1885. France was severely weakened during the Second Imperialist War, known as World War II. So national liberation struggles intensified, especially following the Fifth Pan-Africanist Congress in 1945. And even more coordinated after the All-African People's Conference in Accra, Ghana, 1958. By then, France was in a pitched battle against Algerian liberation forces, now aided by Pan-African forces. France, facing defeat in Algeria and Africa in general, moved to a new form of imperialism, neocolonialism, granting a subservient independence. Africans' faces in the government and French economic control continued. Only Algeria, who had defeated France on the battlefield, and Guinea-Conakry, who chose independence over the French community that was not directly controlled by French neocolonialism. Today, of course, French neocolonialism faces new challenges in the Sahel, in Senegal, and in West Africa in general. Some of the features of neocolonialism. This form of imperialism, as we said, is the different form of imperialism. The same as when, of course, we know the famous book by Lenin that said imperialism is the highest stage of imperialism. Capitalism. Neocolonialism, as stated by Kwame Nkrumah, is that neocolonialism is the last stage of imperialism. Some of the things that change under neocolonialism is that there's more collaboration in the common territory between imperialist powers. And sometimes an old imperialist power is replaced by a new imperialist power. Like maybe the US will replace the French, or they'll work together in the nation, state, or region. Second aspect, neocolonialism states work together to suppress genuine liberation and contested territories through their common military alliances like NATO and Africa. And third, regional and continental institutions are used to entrench imperialism by pressuring neocolonial states to intervene in conflicts in their favor, in the favor of imperialism. They influence organizations like ECOWAS and the African Union and so on. So with that background, we'd like to introduce our guest. We're going to introduce and welcome our first guest, Comrade Imani Moja, a Central Committee member of the PAIGC and the All African People's Revolutionary Party. and Guinea-Bissau. Now, comrades, for some it may seem a little different, but if we know the history of the struggle in Africa, and particularly in this region, uh, in Guinea-Bissau and Guinea-Conakry, there's a long history of an interrelationship there. So it's in fact, even the concepts of the All African People's Revolutionary Party come from this relationship. The relationship in the between the PIGC and the Democratic Party of Guinea, and its relationship to Kwame Nkrumah, who wrote the book calling for the All African People's Revolutionary Party, Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. So with Imani has been a long time organizers in both of these organizations, and I want to welcome him as he gives an overview of this struggle against neocolonialism and imperialism in Guinea-Bissau and the region. Welcome, Comrade Imani.
As they say in Ghana, Kwaba, and as they say in Kenya, Jumbo, Tairi Kwame Penduzi, ready for revolution. So we're talking about neocolonialism, French imperialism in Africa Day. And if you allow me, I have a proposal to have a subtitle also, the fundamental importance of culture, revolutionary consciousness, and coordination of revolutionary political parties to defeat colonialism. As you correctly stated, Satchmo said it's the last stage of imperialism. As after neocolonialism, socialism. Our revolutionary greetings and appreciation to you, comrades, for allowing us to be together with you without having to go to the airport, without having to worry about getting into a hotel. With the current reality in Guinea-Bissau, being under a reactionary neocolonial kidnapped anyway, or at least prevented from getting on the plane. That's what's happened to many of our comrades. I'm here in the homeland of Amilcar Cabral, who was a great revolutionary Pan-Africanist, a very great socialist, a great strategist of anti-imperialist political and military armed struggle. We are in the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, which resulted from the blood, sweat, tears, and victories, the result of our people's glorious armed struggle for national liberation, considered to be one of the best in the world. When we talk about imperialism, we can't just talk about Africa. We also have to put into the context of the international role of imperialism in the world, and then its particular impact and mechanism used today in Africa. Throughout the world, imperialism has been and continues to be resisted. We want you to know that our people in Africa also resisted in different forms. Unfortunately for us, some of our resistance were temporarily overpowered because the imperialists came with superior arms and we weren't united. So in many cases, the place where resistance took place, where the invaders invaded, it was only the resistors in that area that fought. Those in surrounding areas weren't involved in the collective unified. But fortunately, as time went on, consciousness of the resistance always continued. As the consciousness grew, based upon our culture, our people began to resist in more efficient forms. We went from the form of spontaneous, sometimes individual, or small groups of resistance, to the point where we came to mass movements. And these mass movements began to transform into mass revolutionary parties. This is very important for us, and we should learn from this lesson and apply it into practice today. While all actions against imperialism help us in the different forms, the struggles against Zionism, against neocolonialism, against liberalism, against terrorism, but we want to remind you, as the Communist Party of Cuba says, it's the party that's the guarantee of the revolution. We'll probably repeat this again throughout our presentation. It's the party that is the guarantee of the revolution. In Africa, we began to organize different types of parties. We organized popular parties, which had a lot of people, but the essentials were still made at the central level. We've had vanguard parties, which in some cases were elite. We had a few people who wanted to organize the whole society, but then got to the point where we had a mass revolutionary party, where the vanguard inside the party leads the party, but the party wants to encompass all the society, the women, the youth, the workers, the peasants, everybody, the mass party. And in this sense, when French imperialists began to use armed struggle against us in Algeria, in Mali, in what was called the Mali Empire, resistance continued. The Mali Empire was led by Amami Samora Toure. They fought the French for a long time, but were temporarily defeated in 1898. 60 years on, with the continuation of resistance, the people organized themselves into the Democratic Party of Guinea of the Democratic African Revolution, the PDG-RDA. So in the same time, when the French imperialists began to struggle against us, we struggled not only spontaneous, but with planned, well-organized mass political party. In reference to Guinea-Bissau, the party that we serve on its leadership organs, the African Party of Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, PAIGC, is the politically organized manifestation of our people's culture. We want you to give particular note that our party is the African Party of Independence, not like some people say for independence. It's an ideological question. We were independent before temporarily colonized, but we're a party. There were independent people, and now we're independent people struggling to consolidate our independence. We were temporarily colonized, but as we defeated the classical colonialists, we continue our independence. We're developing our culture while making history for the total liberation of the modes of production. That is to say, control from the conception to the democratic decisions to organized application and practice, or if you want to say execution or implementation. That is to say, all power to the organized people. The other party I made reference to is the Democratic Party of Guinea, of the Democratic African Revolution, the PDG-RDA. It's an anti-imperialist party, revolutionary Pan-Africanist party, a mass revolutionary party. These parties are examples of mass revolutionary party that englobe, that encompass women, youth, workers, peasants, every layer of society, every age. So when you study the glorious armed struggle in Algeria from 1954 to 1962 against French imperialism, it was led by a front, not a party, a national liberation front. There were also other armed struggles that emerged in Madagascar, which is in southeastern Africa. And almost the same time, there was an armed liberation struggle that began in Cameroon, in the western part of Africa, toward Central Africa, right next to Nigeria. These armed struggles were going on. There were also armed struggles going on in Namibia, Angola, Mozambique, Kenya, Zambia, just to mention a few. There were also other anti-colonial struggles that did not reach the level of armed struggle, or people's wars, if you want, but they had non-armed resistance, which continued in places like Senegal, Nigeria, etc. Maybe we shouldn't have begun to cite the names of countries because, in fact, resistance continued throughout the length and breadth of the African continent and our diaspora. Whoever our children want found, got it. Despite all the imperialist violence, all the atrocities, our people continue organized and based upon our culture, our dignity, saying that the people who want dignity must have liberty. There were those areas where we had armed struggles, as I mentioned earlier, and other struggles where they didn't get to the point of armed struggle, but there was violence. In these areas where they didn't go to armed struggle, they used positive action, such as strikes. For example, with the PDG-RDA, which was a part of the Democratic African Rally for all the countries in Africa, West Africa that were colonized by the French. They organized strikes. They did a strike against the railroad the last 70 days. They did different types of positive actions against the colonialists. Simultaneously, the French imperialists were becoming weaker because they had already lost the colony of Haiti. and the colony of Vietnam. They lost Haiti in 1802. They lost Vietnam in 1945 when the Communist Party of Vietnam, through the National Liberation Front, defeated the Japanese imperialists, defeated the French imperialists, and proclaimed independence in 1945. After the Second Imperialist War, called World War II, the Vietnamese continued, even though the United States was supporting France. And even after the defeat of the French, the United States continued support. So France was in trouble, had already struggled being bombed inside of Europe, losing its colonies, and losing most of its major resources. So they're involved in the struggle inside of Europe, but also losing Algeria, a country probably 5 times as large as France. The armed struggle was so intense in Algeria that the French became desperate. They tried to do everything but Guinea, as our brother and comrade Sebukwe earlier said, Guinea broke away from French imperialism totally. They created a party state led by the PDGRDA, who was coordinated with a revolutionary party in Ghana called the CPP, the Convention People's Party, the party led by Sajifo Kwame Nkrumah. So we see there's a close relationship between African resistance against French imperialism and worldwide anti-imperialism. While we had our comrades in the National Front of Vietnam, led by the Communist Party of Vietnam, during the same time, the United States began to merge as the world leading imperialist country, led the fight against the Vietnamese and lost. So the People's Democratic Republic of Guinea made a total break with total, as we said, a total rupture from French imperialism. Not only did they kick out the French army, they also kicked out the French franc, the money of France, and created our own sovereign currency called Cillian, which was on par with the dollar, with the French franc, and other currencies in the world. They opened up Guinea for revolutionary parties and movements, including the PIDC, the African Party of Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. They gave us everything, not just the PIDC, but also the MPLA, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, the UPC, the Union of People of Cameroon, the Revolutionary Party in Cameroon, the Pan-Africanist Congress, and the African National Congress of Azania, South Africa. Many different liberation movements were based in the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea. Frelimo, the Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, had its office there. Revolutionaries like Kwame Ture were given citizenship and living support, along with Zinsley Miriam Makeba, who had been exiled, Mother Africa, who had been exiled from her birthplace of Azania, South Africa by the apartheid racist regime and occupied Azania, South Africa. Guinea Congress opened up all the army bases to the PIDC, MPLA, Frelimo, etc., so they could get political military training. After the independence of Algeria in 1962, after the glorious armed struggle, the National Front for the Liberation of Angola also opened up its doors of Algeria, not only for liberation movements in Africa, but liberation movements throughout the world. Ernesto Che Guevara spent 6 months there coordinating the high command for representatives of all the countries in South America. Some of the veterans of Algeria also came to Guinea Congress to help train PIDC comrades there. So we want you to understand that even during the glorious armed struggle in Algeria, the PD of Guinea Conakry, the CPP of Ghana, helped the Algerian Revolution. The great Frantz Fanon used to transport arms from Ghana to Algeria during the glorious armed struggle, as well as from Egypt, where Gabriel Nasser was the revolutionary president, who gave support to the Algerian Revolution and some political support, as well as material support in terms of arms to fight against the French imperialists. They've had a very close relationship with the revolutionary parties and movements in the world. The anti-imperialist forces such as the Communist Party of Cuba, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party of Vietnam, the People's Workers' Party of the Democratic Republic of Korea, just to name a few. So you're seeing the example that they gave us. They gave us an example that organized with the masses of the people in the villages, in the neighborhoods, on the work sites, women, workers, youth, at the same time, organized at the level of Africa, organized at the level of the world, because imperialism operates at the level of the world. Imperialism has a lot of coordination, but frankly speaking, we have relatively little coordination among ourselves. The Revolutionary Marxist Party is key to this. Of course, as the imperialists fall, and they're falling, They become more desperate, very violent. They commit assassinations and a lot of sabotage. They sabotage the economies of the independent country. They sanction the revolutionary country. They introduce counterfeit money to sabotage the economy. They create their mass media like Voice of America, BBC, RFI, France 24, Dutch Welle, to bring an image that revolution Africans are quote unquote terrorists. The biggest weapon that they use is traitors. The imperialists use weapons, they use bombs, they use missiles, many different types of armed weapons. They use propaganda as weapon, but the biggest weapon that they use is traitors. They use traitor police and traitor military, most of whom were either trained in Western Europe or in the United States. They use traitors inside of revolutionary parties. But fortunately, as time continues, the revolutionary consciousness and the resistance always continues in different forms based upon our culture. Just like when we went from the form of spontaneous, sometimes individual or small groups of resistance, to the point where we came to mass movements, until we grew to the point where we began to transform the mass movements into revolutionary parties. It's very important for us to take note of this. We must remember that the Communist Party instructs us that the party is the guarantee of the revolution. And we repeat this again and again. It's the party that is the guarantee of the revolution. Here in Guinea-Bissau, after the glorious armed struggle, a mass people's war, which was led to its victory by the PAIGC in 1973, we were constructing socialism, increasing the consciousness of our people in the schools, through the radios, meetings with youth, women, the workers, through their organizations. They used a traitor to do a coup d'etat against us in 1980. This coup maker was supported by French colonialism and neocolonialism in Senegal, the neighboring country to us, particularly Dakar. But you should note that in Senegal was the very first place that the French colonized in all of Africa. And Dakar, which is known to be as the capital of Senegal, at that time was the capital of all of what they call French West Africa. The traitor who did the coup d'etat against us, Nino Vieira, did his best to get rid of the party, to form another so-called party, but he wasn't able to because of the conscious level of our people. In 1984, a French-supported reactionary coup d'etat was carried out against the party state of the PDGRDA in Guinea-Conakry. Since then, the party has returned to power. Eventually, war broke out here in Guinea-Bissau in 1998, and Nino lost. A few years later, the French neocolonialists in Guinea-Conakry, the ones that did the coup against the PDG, brought Nino back by force on a helicopter after making a deal with some traitor military leaders. They imposed Nino as president again in 2005, but he was killed in 2009. But the enemy never stopped, so we can never stop. We must never stop. There was some common belief in Africa that once a revolutionary party comes to power and kicked out of power, they'll never come back to power again, but they're wrong. The PIGC was kicked out of power more than once. We can say that in 1980, we were kicked out of party. We were kicked out of power by the coup. We began to have a balance between those of us who were in the party and those who were there in the presidency. Eventually, in 2004, the PIC came back to relative power in every area. And then in 2008, it took control of the presidency, the National People's Assembly, and the government. But they brought about another coup 4 years later in 2012. We struggled against that coup and came back to power again in 2014. During that time, the French colonialists, neocolonialists of Senegal, led by Macky Sall, the former neocolonial puppet president of Senegal, with the help of Denis Sassou Nguesso, the neocolonial presidential puppet in Congo, Brazil, another puppet of France, with support of Mamadou Buhari, the late dead president of Nigeria, a neocolonial puppet of France, England, and the US. They worked together to impose a neocolonial president against us in Guinea-Bissau called Umaru Sissoco Embalo. One of the main targets of them was to get rid of the PIGC. But to do that, first they had to get rid of the honest leadership of the party. They persecute, they tell lies about the honest leadership of the party, but the objective is to get rid of the party itself. They know that the party is the instrument that the people created to defend the interests of the people. It's the politically organized manifestation of our people's culture. We tell them to get rid of the party. First of all, go get rid of the sun. Stop the rain from raining, from falling. And then you can see, if only then you can see if you can get rid of the party. We have to look forward to see similar examples. Just to give you a couple of examples, after the coup d'etat against the Sajid Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, on that day of shame, 24th February 1966, the party, called the Convention People's Party, was prohibited. Many of its leaders were arrested, others were killed, others fled, but they also had some who betrayed. After the coup d'etat against Ahmed Sekou Touré on the 3rd of April 1984, the party, the Democratic Party of Guinea PDG, was banned. Many of its leaders were also either imprisoned, killed, or fled the country. Some of the leaders who were in prison died in prison. Others were killed and thrown into the oceans. Others fled. Of course, we also had some who, like in Ghana, who betrayed in Ghana. We had some who betrayed in Guinea County, like we had some who betrayed here in Guinea-Bissau. We mentioned that the PIGC came back to power in 2008 and was kicked out of power again in a coup d'etat in 2012. And we came back again in 2014, kicked out again in 2016, won legislative elections in 2018, kicked out again in 2020. Well, in 2023, against all odds, the PIGC, with no money, no campaign materials, beat the neocolonial regime led by the French neocolonial puppet Umaro Sissoko Embalo. The neocolonialists had millions and millions of dollars. They had all types of new cars, all types of t-shirts, banner, money, and continued to persecute the PIGC. They even had made us change the logo. So that we went to the legislative elections, they thought we couldn't beat them. We beat them because the almighty people are the PIGC, beat the neocolonialists. But of course, the only laws that imperialists respect is their own interest. That's the only law. After the PIGC and its coalition, the PAI Terranca, won the elections in June 2023, the neocolonial regime violated every aspect of the Constitution, for that matter. They did everything to stop the PIGC from taking over the National People's Assembly and the government. After 2 months from June to August, finally, we were able to have the president of the PIGC become elected as the president of the National People's Assembly and to have our government in place in August. Meanwhile, they began to train militia. They brought some from Niger when Mohamed Bazoum was the president before the coup. They brought a militia from Congo, Brazzaville, where Denis Sassou Nguesso is the neocolonial French puppet president. Since then, former neocolonial puppet Nigeria, Mohamed Buhari, term of office in, and he died. And the former neocolonial puppet of Senegal, Macky Sall, lost elections in Senegal. Our people in Senegal organized themselves in uprisings for almost 2 years. Now, the patriarchs, the Pasteur Party, rules Senegal. At the end of November 2023, the neocolonialists have manufactured a so-called attempted coup d'etat. Even though the Constitution says that when elections happen, you can't dissolve the National People's Assembly under any circumstances for at least 1 year, Umaro Sissoko Embalo did it anyway because he doesn't respect our Constitution. It's important for you to know the Guinea-Bissau is a semi-presidential regime. It's a parliamentary system where the party that wins the absolute majority of the seats in the National People's Assembly is the party that forms the government. This gives people power to their representatives in the National People's Assembly, which are organized into political parties. While this was going on, the neocolonialists used the abuse to make all types of secret deals with the French and other imperialists such as the United States. They signed secret deals to sell our material resources to either give directly to the French and or via neocolonials in Senegal. For example, a large percent of our Guinea-Bissau economic exclusive zone in the sea has a lot of petroleum. So they signed secret agreements to allow Senegal, up before 2024, before the change, to allow neocolonial Senegal to exploit it. But who was the company that exploits it? It's not a Senegalese company. It's a French petroleum company called Total, Total, out of France. Another example is recent. Before the elections, before Umaro Sissoko lost the elections, he was one of those 5 presidents of West Africa that went to meet with Donald Trump. Now, there's a U.S. imperialist company called Chevron Just go and exploit some of our petroleum, and they'll get 90%. We, the owners of the petroleum, only get 10% through this secret deal. So we continue our struggle on against all types of persecution, all types of beatings, kidnappings, imprisonment. And so we're going to really prepare ourselves for presidential elections, which should have happened because the term of office ended on the 27th of February, 2025. Elections should have been organized 3 months before that, as the Constitution dictates, so that the new president would take office on the day that the old president, the sitting president's term of office ends. They pushed it back a whole year. And they only did because of a pressure. We finally had presidential elections on the 23rd of November, 2025, last year. They blocked the PIDC from being a contender in the legislative elections, and they blocked our president, brother, and comrade Domingo Simões Pereira from being the presidential candidate. So we had 3 options. We could decide to put our people in the streets and bring the country to a halt, or we could boycott elections, or a third option, we could decide to join forces with one of the presidential candidates who was already approved by the Supreme Court. We decided the third option. We decided to join forces with our brother and comrade Fernando Diaz da Costa, because his ideology is not very different from the ideology of the PIDC. The agreement we had and still have is that when we win presidential elections, President Fernando Diaz da Costa will make all illegal, unconstitutional decrees made by Omar Sissoko Embalo null and void. That means that brother and comrade Domingo Simões Pereira will continue his 5-year mandate as the president of the National People's Assembly, and the PIDC and its coalition, the PAI Terra government, will return to govern. And we beat the neocolonialist forces. With all the resources they have, our people showed the high level of revolutionary consciousness, the high level of culture, the high level of dignity, and we beat them in the first round, making history again. But now here comes the problem again with imperialist neocolonial puppets. After all the votes were counted at the voting tables where our people were present, the official tallies were published. Our people took pictures. From there, they went to the 10 different regions to be compiled. There were a lot of clashes at the level of the regions between the people who surrounded the regional electoral authorities' offices and some of the armed agents that were there to try to change the votes. All of the candidates had already had the preliminary results since the evening of the election on the 23rd, because they all have representatives of each of the voting tables and the regional electoral commissions. The neo-colonial puppet Omar Sissoko Embalo already knew that his only alternative was to try to prevent the regional electoral commissions from compiling the results. They sent their armed agents. They kicked out public prosecutors. They tried to prevent the candidates represented from having access to the office. But our people won, and the results were published at all of the regional electoral commissions. There was a lot of international observers from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, along with the African Union, the Community of Portuguese-speaking countries, CPLP, even the European Union, electoral observers. And they all have the official results from the regional electoral commissions. The only remaining stage was for the National Electoral Commission to announce the results region by region on 27 November 2025. On the day before, 26 November, the international observers visited the National Electoral Commission's office and inquired whether authorities were ready to announce the results on the following day, that is, the 27th. Their response was, yes, we're ready. They have all the regional results and will announce them as scheduled on the following day, 27th November. A few minutes after international observers left the Electoral Commission's office, shots were fired. Some armed agents invaded the National Electoral Commission's office. They arrested some of the authorities. They destroyed computers. They stole money from the workers, while simultaneously, other armed agents kidnapped brother and comrade Domingo Simões Pereira and some of the other leaders of the PIDC, the PRS party, and tried to kidnap President-elect Fernando Diaz da Costa, who escaped and later took refuge in the embassy of Nigeria in Bissau. A few minutes later, ex-president Omar Sissoko Embalo, I should say ex-imposed president Omar Sissoko Embalo, gave a press conference saying that he was, quote unquote, captured by Balanta military leaders. Balanta is an ethnic group here. He was captured by Balanta military leaders who have taken over the state, quote unquote. And that's when, you heard me correct, that was him, Omar Shakoko Mbala himself announcing the coup. Well, I suppose he was in the custody, quote unquote, custody of the military coup leaders. A few minutes later, all the radio stations were closed by the armed agents. The national television station was occupied by a so-called military high command that announced that they took power to quote unquote prevent the election results from being announced. Because if it would have been, it would have caused a quote unquote tribal war. And the drug lords were involved in the electoral process, and all orders of states were suspended. The following day, on the 27th, the military high command nominated a so-called government composed of the very same collaborators of Umar Sissoco Embalo. They allowed Umar Sissoco Embalo to leave the country to get on a flight to Senegal. The person who was nominated to be the prime minister of the military regime is also at the same time the minister of finance. He's the same person who served as the campaign manager for Umar Sissoco Embalo in his defeated campaign. He'd already been the Minister of Finance for Umar Sissoco Embalo. All the members of the so-called government are either families of Umar Sissoco Embalo or they're his direct collaborators. That is, they're collaborators of French imperialism. All the so-called military leadership are collaborators, and everybody knows this, including the international observers and the international community organizations. So it's the same neo-colonial French regime. The same day they invaded the national headquarters of the PIDC, as well as some other parties like the PRS. As I'm speaking to you right now, they're still occupying the PIDC headquarters. If that wasn't the case, I would not be in my house participating in this webinar. I would be in the PIDC headquarters, as usual. But we can't get into the headquarters, not into our national headquarters, and then eventually they invaded our regional headquarters in all of the 9 regions of Guinea-Bissau. As I'm speaking to you right now, the president of the National People's Assembly, who's also the president of PIDC, President Comrade Domingos Simões Pereira, is still in prison. On the 30th of January, they took him from a prison cell where they had him since the 26th of November. On the 30th of January, they transferred him to house arrest because of pressure from inside the country as well as some of the regional and international organizations. Even though the resolution was to release him unconditionally, they put him on a house arrest. So now his whole family's on a house arrest. He can't leave. He can't have visitors. And they even cut off his surveillance cameras in his house. The elected president, Fernando Diaz da Costa, is under a similar situation in his house. All resistance that we bring about here is met with brutal violence. Just a few days ago, on the 31st of March, this brutal regime assassinated a very good brother, a young comrade by the name of Brigadier Luis Balanta, who was only 32 years old. Why? Because he was leading one of the non-violent resistance organizations. He never said anything bad about anybody. He never used violent words. All he said was, quote unquote, announce the electoral results. Free all political prisoners from custody. They stabbed him. They beat him. They pulled his hair out. They killed him with 2 bullets from an AK-47 machine gun. If comrades try to travel, either they kidnap him at the airport and put him in jail, or they just stop you from traveling if you're lucky. You have your ticket and all your documents, but you can't get on the plane if you're lucky. Even our members of parliament, who are also not only members of parliament here in the People's National Assembly, but also members of the West African Parliament, went to the airport to go to a meeting in Nigeria. They were kidnapped. Last week, one of our members of the parliament, who's also leader of the PIDC, was going to travel to the neighboring country, Senegal. He went to the airport with his ticket and all his documents, but they stopped him from traveling. So we'd like for you to help us analyze. We want you comrades, to help us analyze the following. Number one, we should analyze this. We have official resolutions from the heads of states of the Economic Community of the West African States, ECOWAS. You can get it online. You get on their Facebook, ECOWAS.int. They demand the political prisoners be released unconditionally. They demand the military return to the barracks. They demand that results of elections be announced. the African Union, the European Union, CPLP, the Community of Portuguese-speaking countries say the same thing. So we got all these resolutions. You got statements from the United Nations. Nobody's giving statements in support of this regime. The neocolonial military regime said they will abide by the transition as dictated by ECOWAS. Yet, they don't implement the resolutions. The question is why? What's the exact level of imperialist interference? Not just French, collective imperialism. How can they kill people in broad daylight? How can they have armed agents surround the Supreme Court building in daylight with guns and force the Supreme Court judge to resign? The PIGC's, as we mentioned earlier, headquarters is closed. But we have to have a Congress this year. Because one of the things that they're saying, which seems to be supported by some of the international organizations, is that now they're going to have elections again in December this year, 2026. In order for the PIGC to participate in these elections, we have to have a Congress, as our statutes demand. We have to have Congresses every 4 years. The last Congress was in November 2022, which means that we have to have a Congress and no later than November 2026, especially if we're going to participate in elections in December. But in order to have a Congress, we have to have a Central Committee meeting to establish a National Preparatory Commission for this Congress. So we decided, since our headquarters are occupied, we'll rent a hotel room. They went to the hotel room and threatened the hotel owners, so we couldn't have it. Even to have our national secretary, we had to have them online. So I want you all to help us analyze this. Okay, so we're going to pause here. I want to hear your opinions, any questions you have, or your perspectives, and we thank you. Luta continua. The struggle continues. Ready for the revolution.
All right. Thank you, comrade. But I guess we're gonna save the questions probably till we get our second presentation, so hopefully people will write down any questions they have for you as we move on to the next presentation. All right. Now we're going to hear from our comrade Njiba Farawak. She is currently organizing in Ghana. She is a member of the Central Committee of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. She is also on the Council of the All African Women's Revolutionary Union of the AAPRP. And of course, she's been a long-time organizer. She's organized in several places around the globe. We respect her contributions over I don't know how many years in the AAPRP. It's been a substantial amount of time. Comrade, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all your accolades, but I'm going to ask you if you are ready to present.
Yes, African. Thank you so much. And thank you for the intervention. You may hear some overlap between myself and Comrade Imani. And before I go, I want to thank Comrade Imani for the his very extensive intervention, both on French imperialism and neocolonialism in West Africa and Africa, and also what's currently happening in Guinea-Bissau, and the struggles against the imperialist struggles against the PAIGC. So, revolutionary greetings, comrades. I would like to first off thank the organizers in Kenya and the event that this sort of side event is linked to. I think it's really important to have these kinds of side events to raise awareness around questions of imperialism and neocolonialism. As Comrade Sobukwe said, I'm a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. And my comments today reflect our line and ideology, but I'm also an educator. And so some of my comments may come from a historical perspective, but I believe that it's important to understand history in order to see where we are today. I'm happy to speak today specifically on the impact of French imperialism in general, on the recent tensions in the Sahel, on the AES interventions,
Era falar
or interactions
do impacto do imperialismo em Sahel.
You're freezing up a little bit.
with
Estás a bloquear um bocadinho.
military industrial complex and its impact in Africa. Before we, can you hear me? I'm going to turn my
Vou
camera
desligar a
off for the time
câmara.
being for bandwidth issues.
No problem.
Before we discuss French imperialism in
Antes de irmos para a
today,
parte
we
do
must have a clear
imperialismo francês em África, temos de ter uma noção mais clara,
particularly transporting enslaved Africans to
transportando
the continent.
africanos escravizados para o
I'm getting out of the English channel, sorry. Particularly with the transport of enslaved Africans.
com o transporte
to the
de africanos escravizados para o Caribe.
After the abolition of the slave trade globally and in France as well, due to the pressure and revolts in their so-called colonies, such as Saint Domingo in 1793, France struggled to hold on to their control. France did not go lightly. Instead, it ramped up the colonial project on the African continent. This is true for many European nations that were present at the Berlin Conference that Comrade Sobukwe spoke about. And we often say 1884 or 1885 because the Berlin Conference began in December 1884 and ended in 1885 January. At this conference, France walked away with control of over 1/3 of the African continent. This would set the stage for over 130 years of direct French imperialism in Africa. And I want to make a particular note that we say over 130 years because I'm claiming that there is still clear French imperialism in Africa today. So we should say 130 years and counting. During this period, France cemented its imperialist agenda through economically, politically, and socially colonizing African people in over 1/3 of the continent. And we say economically because we know that neocolonialism was an economic project, as imperialism is. We say politically because we're clear that France is in control and has been in control of many African nations' political systems through their economy. And we say socially because we are aware that particularly during colonialism and the neocolonial project, France went about a campaign to make French-speaking Africans Frenchmen and women, which shifted their African understanding of African culture to include France and French culture, as Comrade Imani spoke about the importance of culture. Horace Campbell reminds us that Amilcar Cabral's conception of imperialism as piracy on dry land drove home the point that the looting and plunder, both during and after the notorious scramble for Africa, must constitute the beginning of all meaningful analysis in this area. This is in line with Kwame Nkrumah's work on neocolonialism, his text, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, where he dictates that Africa will be a neo-colony of Europe and North America, and the new scramble for Africa after independence will be the central fight. This analysis has proven correct, particularly in French-speaking Africa, where at independence, most nations were forced to link their economy to France's economy through the central bank. This is known as the CFA zone, French Community of Africa, in which the currencies, with the exception of Algeria and Guinea, And we know what happened in Guinea-Conakry when Sékou Touré and the PDG refused to join the CFA zone. The French retaliated by taking every euro, every pound, every dollar, every desk, every pencil, anything of value out of Guinea. It was Kwame Nkrumah and the CPP that gifted Guinea 1 million US dollars to begin their independence journey. And the currencies and economies of African nations are linked to France. And this is a particularly important point, that the CFA zone links the economies of African nations to France. The CFA zone at one point included 14 African countries, primarily in West and Central Africa. This raises questions about one's sovereignty and liberation. The vicious neo-colonial approach of France at independence to keep hold of its so-called territories on the continent through indirect rule has led to France having both a political and military presence in most African countries that were so-called former colonies of France. This and the unfortunate early allegiance of many independent African leaders to France, of course, with the exception of Sékou Touré of Guinea and later Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso in the 1980s, led to years of ideological, political, and military dependence on France. This is not the end of the story. The uprisings in Burkina Faso in 2014 and other West African nations linked to France signaled a shift in the masses' resistance against this so-called French community in Africa. This uprising was not simply about eradicating the current regime in Burkina Faso, led by President Blaise Compaoré, who we know murdered Thomas Sankara, but about French imperialism and the need for a Pan-African revolution that would eradicate France and its insidious political, economic, and ideological hold on Africa. Pan-African resistance against imperialism, particularly in West Africa, but across the continent around this period, including Nigeria, Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Guinea-Bissau, and other nations. Over the last 10 to 15 years, has set the stage for the current struggle with French imperialism and the military-industrial complex in parts of West Africa, but also throughout the continent. It's important to note that when we say Pan-African resistance against imperialism, we're not specifically talking about the Nigerian government, for example, or the Ghanaian government, for example. Certainly Burkina Faso and Guinea-Bissau at the moment, yes, we're talking about those governments. But we're talking about the resistance that's happened, the organic resistance from the masses of people who were promoting and pushing for Pan-Africanism over imperialism. And this has happened on small scales, on larger scales, in political parties, and in smaller organizations. Over the last few years, there's been a growing sense of anti-French sentiment that has led to coups across West Africa, primarily in French-speaking nations in or near the Sahel. These military juntas occurred in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger. While in Senegal, the masses rose up against the former President Macky Sall, as Comrade Imani suggested. What these anti-French movements have in common is their resistance to French control of their nations. In these nations, the French military was pushed out of the country, and in some cases, NGOs were blocked from operating in nations like Burkina Faso, where there's restrictions, and Mali, due to their ability to influence officials in the nation. We have to also acknowledge that while this is occurring, there's also an uneasy relationship between ECOWAS and the Alliance of Sahel States, which is an alliance of Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and others are coming on board. The relationship began difficult because of ECOWAS's stance on coup d'etats. And I would say this, that coup d'etats versus democracy is a major struggle across the continent. Is a democratic dispensation more or less significant than a coup d'etat? Here are some of the debates that are happening. It's not necessarily our job to say whether one is worse or better than the other, particularly Western democracy, both of which are not African culture, right? So the question becomes, how do we analyze either a democratic election, a coup d'etat, or even a bloodyless coup d'etat like what happened in Zimbabwe? How do we analyze it and find out how we can use these vehicles to either promote Pan-Africanism or will it promote US imperialism and global imperialism? The challenges with ECOWAS and other Pan-African bodies faced is that they actually struggle with mandating their full Pan-African mandate. Apologies for the two mandates. At one point, ECOWAS suspended the 4 West African nations that experienced coups from 2023 to 2024. This response may have pushed the formation of the AES, which can be viewed as a homage to the Ghana-Guinea-Mali Union of the 1960s. Despite internal struggles, and we also must state that there's now talk of ECOWAS having a less black and white response to coups, particularly in West Africa. We also have to note that particularly the sharp response was out of a fear for West Africa falling to coup d'etats across the region. Despite internal struggles between, for example, ECOWAS and AES, there's still challenges in West Africa and across the continent that require a unified response and cannot be handled by either AES or ECOWAS or the AU alone. This raises questions about the possibility of building Pan-African unions despite their ideological differences. Is this even possible? Does the union have to be fundamentally anti-imperialist to be effective? For example, in addressing the new scramble for Africa, the new threats of poverty, imperialism, so-called terrorism, and other critical issues facing the continent, how do we address those if the union is not anti-imperialist? I have about 3 minutes and I'll be done. One thing is clear from my perspective. The removal of French imperialism is a start to building a Pan-African future in Africa. However, we cannot replace French imperialism with American imperialist actors or African co-conspirators who do the bidding of the imperialist nations. And we heard about several of the co-conspirators in Guinea-Bissau at the moment. For example, across the continent, the U.S. in Ghana, particularly the U.S. has what it calls a cooperative security location known as the West Africa Logistics Network at the Kotokai, which is now the Accra International Airport. The U.S. also has bases in Djibouti and Kenya, but most disturbing is that Nigeria is working closely with the U.S. military. So much so that the president of Nigeria confirmed that the bombing led by AFRICOM in the Sokoto state, northwest Nigeria, was a joint operation. There was not a major outcry, or at least not one loud enough to be heard beyond a few days. We must question and ask ourselves, should we be replacing French imperialism with US or European imperialism? I say the question is absolutely not. And this goes for international finance, for NGOism, and for even addressing questions of terrorism. What we are all missing in what we are missing in all of this resistance against French imperialism is a united response that is led by the people who are ideologically opposed to Africa being used as it has been for the last several years. We must embrace Pan-Africanism through Pan-African political parties and small Pan-African organizations. We must also embrace the importance of transforming the political education of the masses of people, as well as those who are so-called leaders of these institutions. We cannot allow the leaders of ECOWAS, the AU, or even our governments wherever we happen to find ourselves, off the hook because they are not Pan-Africanists. The masses of people must put pressure in order to ensure that they are anti-imperialist and Pan-Africanist. This is the system we're working with today, and we have to find alternatives to that system. Imperialism will not fall through the work of one organization or political party. It will take the work of all of us, and we will then have to decide how we build a scientific socialist future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, comrade. All right. So I'm just going to start with just one question, and then we're going to open it up to, and both of you can respond, and then we're going to open it up to everybody else. The one question that I want to start with is that, when we opened up, we talked about the upcoming French African summit that's going to go on here in Kenya. We want you to give us your thoughts on this development, and how do you see it in the context of French imperialism and its history in Africa.
Carmen Imani, do you want to take the lead and I'll come to you?
Okay. It's clear that France has lost ground. It's been losing ground over many years. It's clear, as we pointed out. It's clear that the French imperialism that existed in the 1920s and 1930s has been severely weakened by the factors of contradictions among the imperialists themselves that manifested itself during the Second War of Imperialism, called World War II, and then by the masses resistance, particularly in the armed form, as we mentioned earlier, places like Algeria, Madagascar, Cameroon, etc. So given that French imperialism has been severely weakened, it's trying to get its influence in the former British colonies as well. Kenya is one of those places. It's a former British colony that's in the stage of neocolonialism. And so the owners of those who want to control capital, are desperately trying to coordinate themselves together, desperately, particularly given that Kenya is also in East Africa, and most of the colonies of France are in West Africa. They already lost the colonies in Northern Africa, particularly Algeria, and were severely weakened in places like Tunisia. So, in our opinion, given their history, it's clear that they're trying to. It's like when you're on a ship and it's sinking. You're trying to grasp a hold of anything. So, okay, let's grasp hold of this neocolonial regime in Kenya to help us get our more rooted in this part of Africa. It won't succeed because there in Kenya also, of course, Sobukwe knows better than us. He's there, but we follow it too. We see that the consciousness of our people in Kenya is very high. Many of them have risked their lives, been beaten, imprisoned, and been found with a lot of tear gas in their just struggles against neocolonialism in Kenya, as well as other parts of Eastern Africa as well. So it's a desperate attempt by the French to try to grab hold of anything, even a leaf in the ocean, thinking that will save their lives. That's our opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just a quick Google search, the Africa Forward Summit, Africa-France Partnerships for Innovation and Growth says it all, right? One, when you have lost the sort of the ideological war in your in your sort of the places in which you have historically had the minds of the people, right? Minds and the hearts of the people, you now must shift your tactics, right? And this is the new scramble for Africa, is really what is happening, where France is coming in and let's have equal footing. Let's give, other African countries grants and loans and finances to address things such as AI, industrialization, youth entrepreneurship, right? The relationship is never equitable, right? When someone's giving you money, there's no equitable relationship there, first off. Secondly, it's a neo-colonial relationship, right? Particularly because when you think about France as a country, Africa's a continent. How can a country to a continent have a summit about their relationship? That in itself is problematic. And that speaks to this imperialist understanding of France and European countries and even America to the continent. So I think it's a last ditch effort to pull as many co-conspirators, right? African co-conspirators to contribute to France's imperialist onslaught across the continent. Let's not forget they got kicked out of, Mali, Niger, recently Burkina Faso, so now you're kicked out. Your military has been kicked out. Your NGOs are being kicked out. Now you have to operate in different places. And I'll end here, but I'll just say this: let's not forget about the history of missionary work, right? And the history of NGO work, and how these two kinds of work is simply the same thing that France is trying to do through an unequitable partnership. You can't have a country to a continent summit in which you speak about partnerships in which you're going to help a whole continent with AI and youth unemployment when you just got done, you were just kicked out of half of the continent. You're trying to find more footing in other parts of the continent so that you can continue with your tentacles, right? And you can continue the new scramble for Africa. You can take resources. You can, you can continue with your extractivism. You can continue with military, economic and political interventions on the 2/3 of the continent in which you didn't have your tentacles in for the last 130 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, comrades. Okay, we're going to open it up to anybody who'd like to raise a question with either one of our speakers or both.
Definitely. If I'm not speaking over anyone, I'm going to ask my question. Yes, thanks everyone that spoke. It has been very helpful and it has been an insightful webinar. I have a few questions, but for both of you can speak on them. You don't have to speak on everything to save time for others. So the first question is that what is the role of Africans in the diaspora in this current phase of Pan-African struggle? And the second question is in relation to Guinea-Bissau. What should Pan-Africanists worldwide, what should we prepare for as the next stage? Because the new colonial coup d'etat regime, they won't give up power easily. And the liberal organizations like AU and ECOWAS, they might not be very helpful. What should we expect? What should we prepare for? You don't have to give specifics if the strategy cannot be public at this point in time. And the final question, you don't have to speak on every question, is that what should Africans in Nigeria and all these bigger African zones, what word do you have for us? Because when regions like Guinea-Bissau and smaller regions, when they're making progress, it seems that these bigger regions that are not on the same phase are being used to stop all this progress. So what word do you have for organizers in that part of Africa? So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Who wants to?
Go ahead, Comrade Imani.
Well, thank you so much, brother and comrade Abiyabo, for these questions. First of all, we think that the role of Africans in the diaspora is fundamental. Africans in the diaspora must realize that, just like the word says, Africans, that's our identity. It's not just a title, it's an identity. And having identity as Africans means we must do any and everything we can for our mother, to liberate our mother from this lack of dignity, from this terrorism. And that means, first of all, making sure that other Africans are clear on their identity as Africans and ready to do any and everything for our mother Africa to liberate her, which will happen. And this means learning everything we can about Africa, and particularly the resistance, the culture in the form of the resistance, particularly making sure that we apply it inside of organizations, that we help to build these organizations under all types of circumstances. In reference to Africans in Nigeria, you're part and parcel of Africa, the largest population of all of Africa, 220 to 230 million people. and a very strategic geographical location, right there on the border between Central Africa, West Africa, and not far from North Africa. Because once you leave Niger, you go to Niger, it has a border with Libya in Northern Africa, and not too far from East Africa. So the most important thing we think that Africans in Nigeria could do also is to organize, to build strong organizations. We've had an opportunity to go through Nigeria a couple of times, and we're impressed by some of the organizations that are there, but they do self-criticism themselves of not having much of a coordination among the quote-unquote left, the progressive and revolutionary organizations. And secondly, not much presence on the university campuses. We have so many present and future leaders of all the ethnic groups in Nigeria to make sure that you form a strong organization, or at least a front of organizations that is capable of taking Nigeria. Nigeria not only has a large population, it has a lot of resources, a lot of petroleum, one of the largest in the world. It also has a lot of other strategic minerals and resources. As you take Nigeria, as we mentioned earlier, the formula, the model that was given to us by revolutionary organizations, you organize the mass of the people where you at, the women, the youth, the workers, the peasants, but you coordinate with the rest of Africa organizations and anti-imperialist organizations in the world. The same thing is true for Africans wherever they're found in the world to contribute to this coordination. When we lose one part of the ground, we go to another part of the ground. So Pan-Africanists worldwide, in reference to Guinea-Bissau and struggles like Guinea-Bissau, is to make sure we're informed. You know, one thing we found is that a lot of Africans in the world, a lot of people in the world, don't know much about what's going on in Africa. Even those who speak English, English is the largest spoken language in Africa. So even with the English news services, even the alternative service, you don't hear much about places like Guinea. But it's even worse when you get to languages that are not English, like French, and even worse when you get to language like Portuguese. So a lot of times when we go to places, people say, well, where's Guinea-Bissau? Well, we should understand it's a small country that's made a great contribution to the liberation of Africa, helping with the liberation of Angola, Mozambique, political independence of Saint Tome, Cape Verde, but also outside of Africa, in Timor-Leste, East Timor, Frontline, the Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Timor, gives a lot of credit to the PIGC, not only helping with them ideologically, helping them materially, etc. So it's a small country, it has a big impact, like Vietnam, a small country, had a big impact on the world and still does. So the Pan-Africanists around the world have a duty. You volunteered to become a Pan-African. Your consciousness took you there. You also have an ongoing responsibility every single minute of the day to learn more, be humble, and fit in where you can, but always inside of organization. Be a factor of unity. When others are trying to divide, you're making sure that you serve as a factor of unity to unify the progressive and revolutionary forces.
And David, did you?
Yeah, let me come into this one also. I think there's three things that I want to stress. One, specifically starting with the diaspora. If we look historically, the diaspora has been central to the both anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggles, right? Particularly if you look at institutions like African Liberation Day. The first African Liberation Day in 1972 was organized by the African Liberation Coalition, right? And the African Liberation Support Committee. So the diaspora has always had a role in the liberation of Africa and African people, because Africa's liberation and unification will not just benefit Africa, it will also benefit the diaspora. Particularly if you think about what happened recently in Kenya and the PAIGC in Nigeria, and the NSARS movement, the Galamsey movement in Ghana, even the Black Lives Matter movement, you saw protests and resistance on both on the continent and off of the continent. So what the diaspora needs to do is three things, in my opinion. One, everyone should be in a revolutionary Pan-African organization that's transforming our level of political education. Because if not, particularly in the Europes and the Americas, people are so brainwashed by American exceptionalism and European exceptionalism that they are disconnected from the African continent, which is really their savior and their redemption. Two, they must begin to contribute to transforming the ideology of the masses of people in your job, at the grocery store, with your children, in your families, right? In unions. We oftentimes underestimate our contributions towards transforming the political milieu around us, because this is not a fight that 3 or 4 people will win. We need the masses of people to help us win this fight, no matter where you find yourself. And then particularly, I don't want to speak for the PAIGC, but I can say for certain that the pressure from outside of Guinea-Bissau is going to put more pressure on the illegitimate government and ECOWAS to do the right thing, particularly when it comes to elections and allowing the PAIGC into both their headquarters and in order to get on the presidential ballot. And I can attest this because when in 2012, when there was a coup d'etat, the AAPRP had a strong anti-coup campaign in which primarily from outside of Bissau, and that really helped to shift the narrative. And let me just say this, that this may be something that we say often, but call whatever representative you have that you agree with or you don't agree with, and tell them that PAIGC needs to be on the agenda. And then the last thing I want to say about Nigeria, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this in respect to my late Professor Suleiman Yank, who made his transition long ago. But something he said to me, which stuck with me over 20 years, that if Nigeria or South Africa or Egypt or Libya at the time, if they were Pan-African, the entire continent would be a Pan-African entity. Nigeria is wasting away with its neo-colonial apparatus. There's so many people in Nigeria that a groundswell of Pan-Africanists could push the Nigerian government to take on a serious level of responsibility when it comes to Pan-Africanism. And let me also say this, that the Pan-African organizations across the continent, both political parties, in our case, the All-African Committee for Political Coordination, but also with smaller political parties, Pan-African clubs on campuses, need to build a unified network to begin to make sure that our messaging is the same. Because what we have now is we have micro-nationalist Pan-African projects. We need a macro Pan-African project which permeates across the continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Comrade
All
Sabukwe,
right. Uh-huh.
can I add 2 quick things on to Comrade Abioba's question and Comrade Njiba's response? 2 quick ones.
Sure.
Okay, because Comrade Njiba, I can say that she stimulated me when she mentioned the role of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party in the struggle against the military coup of April 2012 in Guinea-Bissau. The AAPRP played a key role. It was in contact with many different organizations, as well as many media outlets, as well as different organizations, ECOWAS, African Union, Security Council, United Nations, CPLP, and it did make a very important difference. Similarly, with this struggle against the coup d'etat that happened on the 26th of November 2025, we see Africans in the diaspora playing a key role. Where Comrade Abioba is in England right now, we were able to participate in a program that they organized last month in support of the struggle in Sudan as well as Guinea-Bissau. That had an impact. Here in Guinea-Bissau, some places where I don't move around that much because of the coup, but the few places I do move around, I had a lot of people say, "Oh, we saw that program in England. That's right on time." You had Africans born in some of everywhere, or in England, and others participating online, who made a big difference. They're having another manifestation coming up next weekend on the 11th of April, being organized by the PIGC in England, along with the coordination of the AAPRP. We saw many in France doing this struggle against this coup, as well as the illegal regime that just got kicked out by the voters in November. We've seen the coordination between comrades of the All African People's Revolution, what they call it, the Parti Révolutionnaire Toute la Peuple Africain in England, which is the All African People Revolutionary Party, coordinated with the PAIGC in France. They have structures in 10 different parts of France, as well as the Liga Pan-Africanist Umoja. We also want to underscore to comrades, when you talk about the places that have kicked out the French military in West Africa, don't forget about Senegal. That's very historical. People don't talk about that much. But last year, the new regime that the people put in their power, past them, they kicked out the French army there. So there's no more French bases in Senegal for the first time.
All right. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Any other comrades who want to make a raise a question?
The question in the chat, comrade.
Okay.
Should I read it out?
Yeah, if you can.
Can
If
you
you're
see it? Okay.
no, I can't see it. Good.
Yeah, let me, I just happened to see it. How can anti-imperialists in both Africa and the West capitalize on this historical moment in relation to broader anti-imperialist successes resulting from the war on Iran?
Okay. Any comments, comrades?
Well, I
Did you
can
wanna
start and then, yeah, I can start and then I can hand it over to Comrade Imani. I think for me, one, I think that there's two things, and I'll be brief because I know we want to get as many people in to make interventions. One of the thing about imperialism is that imperialism is not just in Africa, right? So I think that that's important to acknowledge that imperialist is a worldwide system, right? Which oppresses one, whether you're in Iran, whether you're in Guinea, whether you're in Guinea Conakry, whether you're in Bissau, whether you're in Azania, or whether you're in the US. Right? And so I think that what we can definitely do is we need to begin to have conversations about how imperialism is on its last leg and how the use, because war is oftentimes so-called physical war is oftentimes a last-ditch effort for imperialists to grab power. So I think that we can contribute to much of this resistance, whether it's protests against the capture of Maduro and his wife in Venezuela, whether it's the flotillas going towards Palestine, whether it's the brigades heading to Cuba bringing medical supplies, or whether it's the fight against Iran being unjustly bombed, right, and attacked through war. We can contribute to the conversation, particularly talking about the global nature of imperialism. And we can also contribute to the conversation by acknowledging and pointing out that Pan-Africanism, while it will help strengthen African people, it will also help usher in socialism across this globe. Because Africa is the second largest continent. We have in 2030, the majority of people will be people of color, which AKA means of African descent, because we're all over. We're in Brazil, we're in China, we're on the continent, we're in the US, right? So ultimately, by 2030, the majority of people on this globe will be African. So if the African continent unifies and liberates and shifts from a global capitalist economic system to a scientific socialist economic system, the rest of the world will have no choice but to follow suit. So what we need to be doing is being in conversation with anti-war comrades, with comrades who are fighting in Venezuela, which we do, by the way. We have alliances and brother sisters organizations in the All African People's Revolutionary Parties, but we need to do a better job of being on the front lines and pushing the Pan-African agenda. And we also have to be clear about something. that we had an anti-imperialist, anti-Zionist front in like the late 80s, early 2000s, and which was led by Kwame Ture in the late 90s. The late 90s. And so I think it started the early 90s to the early 2000s, certainly was led by the APRP as well as Kwame Ture, but that was a place in which we were pushing Pan-Africanism to the forefront and also linking the struggles between African people, both from the continent and the diaspora, and with other struggles, particularly Zionists, particularly what's happening in Iran, what's happening in Venezuela, et cetera, et cetera. I think I rambled enough, but I think that's my answer. Over to you, Comrade Imani.
Well, we thank you. We think that the question is very relevant because everything in the world affects everything. We have the imperialists and their allies, capitalists and their allies, and we also have socialists and their allies. There's a struggle between these two. The mass of the people have conscience for socialism, and the mass of people are moving towards socialism. You can look at our brief history in the past, less than 70 years, and see that trend. So any weakness among the imperialists is logically more strength for the anti-imperialists. The imperialist system has already been shown how weak it is because it never wins wars anymore. I mean, they went into Afghanistan to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. And now they're going into Iran to replace the Ayatollah Khomeini with Ayatollah Khomeini. They went into Venezuela to replace the PSUV, but they got the president, Nicolas Maduro, in jail and in prison, in captivity in New York. But you got the vice president of the PSUV, who's the acting president of Venezuela, the People's Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. So you have the same regime in power. So this shows you the weaknesses of imperialism. Now, with the more recent invasion of the Zionists, occupied Palestine, the Zionists of Israel, the Zionist entity of Israel, with the United States settler colony going crazy, they have shown to the world how weak they are. They said they have an Iron Dome, bombs and missiles can't enter into Israel, but now it's raining missiles and bombs. And every time a bomb is there's a political expression for us that imperialism is crumbling. And it's clear that from this desperate attempt by the imperialists, that the entity of Israel is going to be not only weakened, but it's going to be wiped out. It won't continue as a force of occupied Palestine for much longer. The axle of resistance, Hezbollah of Lebanon, Yemen, the revolutionaries in Iraq, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and the people of Iraq are giving more confidence to the freedom lovers of humanity, knowing that imperialism is not unbeatable, but it's defeatable. And as a result of them becoming weaker, that means that other stronger countries that we call of the global south, like China, the People's Republic of China, becoming stronger. We also know that one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons they're also attacking Iran is to try to get to China, because China has what is called a Belt and Road Initiative. It's very linked up to Africa, but Asia, Latin America as well, which is also why they're attacking Latin America too. So now as a result, we see that ships, in order to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, have to pay with Chinese money, yen, not with dollar. So this is another victory for us. And the other victory is that the imperialists now becoming weaker means that the other forces, which are represented by China, also by some of the other forces in line with Russia, will have more of a door open to collaborate on an equal basis with Africa. And don't let anybody fool you with the hype. The relationship between China and Africa is on a just basis. It's on a just basis. And they're our allies. They've been our allies during the glorious armed struggles against imperialism. So we're on the side of Iran against the United States of America and against Israel. And every time they make the political expressions with their drones or their missiles, we clap and we feel stronger. So we're for victory to the forces of Iran, death to the imperialists of the United States of America and Zionist Israel.
Okay, I'll just add this small piece that certainly one of the things if Iran weakens Zionism, we in Africa have to understand that Zionism is one of the biggest forces in terms of maintaining neocolonialism on the African continent. Zionism has been a enemy of the African people for since its inception, even before it created the occupation in Palestine. It worked with British imperialism to take control of our mineral resources, and particularly starting in the southern region when Cecil Rhodes and then Anglo-American were basically funders of the Zionist project and led by people who supported and were involved in Zionism. So what the war does for us is it helps to weaken Zionism in Africa, and it's a collaboration with neocolonial governments. Do we have another question?
Comrade Imani, Comrade Sabukwe, while the other questions are coming in, I also just want to state from a historical perspective that collaboration amongst African people and anti-imperialists is not new. You're talking, we've had collaboration with anti-imperialists in China, in Russia. We were, central to the non-aligned movement and the Afro-Asian solidarity movement, right? Which was headquartered in Cairo under the leadership of Gamal Nasser, right? The non-aligned movement and the Afro-Asian People's Solidarity Movement was in Ghana at the 1958 All African People's Conference, right? So this is not a new intervention. This is an intervention which has history, right? And not only does it have history, but as Comrade Imani and Comrade Sabukwe said, nothing is disconnected. And I think that is a challenge. And I don't see any hands, so I'll just keep blabbering. But that is a challenge that is that we somehow believe that our struggles are more significant than other people's struggles, when we in the All African People's Revolutionary Party recognize the interconnectedness between our struggles and the struggles in Venezuela, our struggles and the struggles in Cuba, our struggles and the struggles in Palestine. And once we move beyond this sort of nationalist understanding of African people's struggles, I think we will run towards liberation.
Okay. All right. Are there any other interventions? Any other comments, questions from our audience or people who are participating? I don't want us to think this is a performance, but certainly, if people would like to make any comments or make questions before we call for close.
Hello.
Yes, sure.
Okay. Pan-African greetings to everyone. So I'm speaking from the University of Ghana, Legon. I'm the administrator for AAPRP Work Study Circle on campus. So, in as much as we are talking about these imperialists, I think they also have a relationship with the local bourgeois, and as people of exploited vacuum in the society was our target towards this local bourgeois, because I think if we are able to do away with the local bourgeois, we've done some part of the job. So what's the relationship between our struggle and the local bourgeois, who are said to be agents of this imperialist? Thank you.
Imani, maybe we start with you. I know you had said something earlier about the traders and as being part of our problem. And certainly we have to see neocolonialism as a whole class of to a certain degree of traders.
Yeah, the local traders, the local bourgeoisie, quote unquote bourgeoisie, They want to be bourgeoisie. In Guinea-Bissau, we say the turtle wants to dance but doesn't have a tail. So the local quote unquote bourgeoisie, they want to be bourgeoisie, but they don't have a tail to dance. That is to say, in order to be bourgeoisie, it means that you own and you control the means of production and the services of a society. Now, and really, we don't have bourgeoisie in Africa. We don't own and control the means of production. What we do is we link up with the bourgeoisie and then call those who link up with them bourgeoisie. So we call them quote unquote African bourgeoisie, but they're really a higher level of petty bourgeoisie, small bourgeoisie, petty bourgeoisie. They don't own or control the means of production. They eat the crumbs, but because the crumbs are larger than we the workers have, we the peasants have, then we look at them as being richer than us. But they're weak. Once you cut the link between them and their bourgeois masters, they fall. And we've seen that happen many times in Africa and the world. And so that should be our role in Ghana, in Africa, and all over the world to cut the link between the local the quote unquote bourgeoisie, which are petty bourgeoisie, and the bourgeois masses. First of all, we have to expose them so that our massive people are becoming more and more conscious all the time. And once the people realize who their enemies are, they work miracles. And we're fortunate to have seen miracles happen. That's the things you think cannot happen. When the people grab hold, they make it happen. When the people grab hold of these correct ideas, when they see the truth, the people grab the truth and put it into practice and make miracles. So we think that the role of us who have a relatively higher level of conscience than those who have a relatively lower level of conscience is to make sure those who have a relatively lower level of conscience have a higher level of conscience and understand who our enemies are. So in places like Legon in Ghana or any part of Ghana, Accra or whatever, Takoradi or wherever the petty bourgeois unmask them. So the masses of people see these are the ones who work. Who are the ones who collaborate with the United States? That just walk in Ghana and put its base at the airport? No, they have collaborated. You have to unmask them and let the people say, these are the ones collaborating them against us. These big buildings you see in Accra or other parts of Ghana, other parts of Nigeria, other parts of Africa, these big buildings, who owns them? These companies, this Coca-Cola, this Nescafe, who owns it? And what do they get from it? They're taking our cocoa. They're taking our cocoa and taking it outside and bringing it back and selling us the worst at the highest prices. Whereas we're not. So unmask them, and the people will give them by many. But it's not new. It's like our sister and comrade Njiba said. It's not new. It might be new to some of us. We didn't know it, but it's been going on for years. But it becomes more clearer and clearer as time goes on, based upon the conscious intervention of those who have moral, who have revolutionary ethics, who give their lives to our people, to serve our people, giving that example, and using an organization to make sure that the information is spread more efficiently, quicker, and that the actions are planned, not just the spontaneous individual. Not an individual gets mad because they kind of realize that that person lives in their house. That one of the people's collaborating with the U.S. or the French imperialists, or is collaborating with the imperialist companies. Let's just go burn out. No, that's just spontaneous. Organize it so that when we move them in a more scientific form, and it's permanent. We get rid of them.
And I'll just come in and I'll say this, Comrade Ibrahim, happy to see you here. I think that the challenge with the petty bourgeoisie, right, is as Comrade Imani said, is yes, they are co-conspirators, right? But the reality is the masses of people, I'm not saying this in a derogatory sense at all. The masses of people lacks a unified ideological clarity to push the petty bourgeois to either decide to be in the people's class, as Sekou Touré says, or the anti-people's class, as Sekou Touré also says, right? So for me, that's the target. The target should be, particularly as a university student, right? Raising the political milieu of the next generation of African leaders, and not African leaders that's in government, but African leaders in the market, African leaders at the shop, African leaders in business, African leaders at university, African leaders in unions, and for all of these, and African leaders in general, because we're all a leader, to promote Pan-Africanism and to begin to promote Pan-Africanism everywhere we go, so that those persons who are exploiting the masses of people, right? But they don't have the as Comrade Imani said, they're not controlling the means or mode of production. So what they're doing is they're in collaboration with those main exploiters, right? And that is lining their pockets to push them and push the masses of people to say this is no longer acceptable. But we can't do that if the masses of people see the petty bourgeois, and because of capitalist ideology, the masses of people want to be like the petty bourgeois, right? So it's important to transform and combat capitalist ideology, which happens on an everyday basis across the globe, but particularly let's talk about Ghana, which talks about rampant individualism, which talks about the importance of putting money in one's pocket. Thank you, class consciousness versus paying someone a living wage, right? Let's think more collectively and go back to our culture, which talks about collectivism and promote Pan-African consciousness across all classes, right? I speak English, but many people here speak more than English or French or Portuguese. You may speak Bete, you may speak Hausa, you may speak Xhosa, you may speak Ewe, you may speak Chi. Whatever you speak, take your Pan-African messaging home. Go home with it. That is how we will begin to expose the petty bourgeois, because the petty bourgeois are everywhere. They're not just in Accra, they're in the village. They're from the village, they're to the peri-urban spaces, because the reality is the petty bourgeois are only allowed to operate as co-conspirators to the imperialists as long as the masses of people do not have the ideological clarity that Pan-Africanism is our only solution. Thank you.
Okay. Comrades, we're coming up to the end. I'm going to give you each a chance to wrap it up or give your last comments and reiterate anything that you'd like to reiterate in a couple minutes. So I don't. Since Imani went first in the presentation, Mjiba, do you want to go first?
Sure, and I'll be very brief. I'll say three things without any commentary. One, if we want to defeat imperialism, we must be in an organization that's promoting Pan-Africanism, that's promoting the total transformation of our minds and building what Kwame Nkrumah calls a new African personnel. One. Two, we must recognize that we must move beyond micro-nationalist understanding project, align with, work with anti-imperialist organizations and movements globally. That will help us to eradicate this imperialist project. And the third and most important thing that we must do is we must begin to take this Pan-African project to the base and identify Pan-African activities that happen on a daily basis, a monthly basis, a moment by moment basis at the base. One may not say, I'm participating in Pan-African activity. It's our job as Pan-Africanists to consolidate those activities, consolidate those Pan-Africanists into the Pan-African movement so that we can once and for all liberate ourselves, transform ourselves, and build a scientific socialist Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'd like to make our few humble comments as we come to a close. But first of all, again, thanking the organizers of this webinar and thanking those who have participated and encouraging, as our sister and comrade Njiba just said, for us to be active with revolutionary consciousness inside of revolutionary organizations. The title of the seminar is Neocolonialism. Fortunately for us, mechanisms of neocolonialism were exposed by Sachs for Kwame Nkrumah in 1965 in his book called Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. And fortunately for us, even though some say that's one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons that the United States did the coup d'etat against Nkrumah and the CPP government, one of the reasons. And they also did their very best to make sure that the book, Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, did not get into our hands. But it's online now. In addition to some of us who have it in our own libraries, it's online. You get the PDF versions without paying a penny. So I encourage comrades to study that. But now that's 60 years ago, they wrote this book. There have been a number of studies recent. One is called Hyper-Imperialism. There's a study of 2023 by a number of forces in what is called the Tricontinental Research Group, in collaboration with other organizations like Pan-Africanism, the Alba movements, etc., where they looked at the recent data to see how imperialism is working now. Because to destroy neocolonialism, it's not just marches, it's not just rallies, it's not just webinars. We have to understand what the mechanisms are, so we can stop the mechanisms from operating. We mentioned that the subtitle of our presentation is Fundamental Importance of Culture. As our sister and comrade Njiva pointed out, going among our people, but not just to teach our people, learn from our people. Our people, we're one of the, I'm one of the people, you're one of the people. Learn from our people. Our people have a lot of intelligence. There's no more intelligence than intelligence of our people. And absorb that culture. Use that culture to inspire us, to give us more strength to make miracles. Increase our revolutionary consciousness by taking the theories that we learn, which are observations, reading books, studies, etc., and put them into practice. That's how we get consciousness, not just by reading. You have to put it into practice. And the place you put it into practice is among the people. Out of all the organizations that exist, history has shown the highest level of organization is the party. And history has shown the different types of parties that exist: the Popular Party, the Elite Party, the Vanguard Party, the Mass Revolutionary Party. The Mass Revolutionary Party is the best form of organization, especially for African people, because of our philosophies of humanism, collectivism, morale that existed in our culture during the time of our ancestors, the longer ancestors and recent ancestors. So be part of the solution. The struggle is beautiful. Sometimes it seems very intense, but if you analyze it properly, along with other people, you realize that we're winning and we're going to win. So we want to thank you. We're together. And we want to do another commercial break for our comrades in England, who are going to organize a manifestation on the 11th of April. So we encourage all of you all to be there who are close by. If you can't be there physically, then participate online, just like our comrades in Portugal on yesterday, or was it Saturday, did a very beautiful manifestation in Lisbon. So keep on organizing. Realize we're one. We're part of the whole. See how can we best fit in every single day, make our humble contribution to make this history that we're making to help move our culture forward. So we thank you, and we're ready for revolution.
All right. We're confident that we'll win. As they say, victory is certain. And I'm even more confident as I see more and more conferences and manifestations of Pan-African level against imperialism. You know, one coming up here in Kenya, and also I understand there's one going down in France, and it seems to be the struggle that is needed in this day and time, when the French are, like you say, coming to Africa to try to continue to or hold on to their old ways here in Africa. So I think the consciousness, as you